Hey guys, Mrs. Horn here. I've got some notes prepared for you that will help you with the Darwinian view of Chapter 22. This information is going to cover everything on page 3 and the beginning part of page 4. I will definitely give you information to fill in all of the blank lines on the pages, but I will also add in some extra stuff that you may have to write in the margins or at the top of the page. So here we go. Darwin believed in descent with modification, which means that all organisms have a common ancestor. He believed that everything on the planet, everything that used to live on the planet, everything came from one common ancestor. Darwin also began to draw evolutionary trees. And these trees, which this is one of his first trees that he drew, these trees would show a common ancestor, usually toward the bottom, and then from there they would branch off, just like a tree. And for every branch that was added meant a new organism. If you were to draw a tree that included organisms, everything that has lived on the planet, most of those branches would come to a dead end. 99% of all species that have ever lived on Earth have become extinct. Some of them became extinct because of catastrophic events, some because of human intervention, and some because they just were not well adapted to their environment. Speaking of adapted, the word adaptation. The word adaptation means it's a trait. It's an inherited trait that will promote their survival and reproduction in their environment. Make sure you're saying it's right. It's an adaptation, not an adaption. So an adaptation is an inherited trait that helps out an organism, helps them survive in their environment. Charles Darwin came up with the theory of natural selection. Now, what he realized first is that humans were involved in something called artificial selection, and I'd like you to write this over here on the side, is that artificial selection is when humans have modified species over time. We do this by breeding dogs or by breeding horses. We've actually chosen two parents that have the best traits or the traits that we like to make an offspring that has the most desirable traits. And as we do this generation after generation, we eventually have the fastest racehorse or the best breed of dog. Charles Darwin thought that if humans could do that with animals, why couldn't nature do that with organisms? And hence the term natural selection. Natural selection is when individuals with beneficial traits will survive and live to reproduce. The organisms that Darwin is the most famous for studying are the finches. There are many types of finches. He discovered these new varieties when he traveled to the Galapagos Islands. When he was very young, in his early 20s, he was asked to board a ship and take a very long trip around the world. And his job was to collect living things, both plants and animals, make sketches of things, observe things. And that's what he did. And one of the places they stopped was a place called the Galapagos Islands. The Galapagos Islands are a series of about 14 small islands, 500 miles west off of the country of Ecuador. The islands are right on the equator, very tropical. And every island they went to, he noticed that there were finches on the island, but they weren't all the same. The finches were slightly different. They had some little variations between them. For example, the cactus eater. The cactus eater had a very unique type of beak. It was very sharp, had a very sharp point, and it was used to tear apart the cactus, eat the cactus flowers, and then get the pulp from the inside of the cactus. There was also the insect eater. The insect eater has a very pointy and narrow beak, which was used to grasp insects out of logs or wood. And then there was a seed eater, and the seed eater had a really large beak compared to the other two, which was used to crack seeds open. Now, these finches all live on different islands. They don't live in the same habitat because the food that they rely on isn't all in the same place. That's why they live on different islands. All these finches, although finches, have some slight differences, and Darwin called those variations. A variation is a difference among individuals within a population. So while they're all finches, they are different types of finches. They have slight differences, specifically in their beak. This population of ladybugs, they're all the same type of ladybugs, but they all have some little variations in their coloring and how many spots and the size of the spots that they have. When you look at this population of ladybugs, is there one ladybug or two ladybugs that have a particular pattern that might help their survival? Is more spots better than others? Is no spots the most beneficial trait? Another component of Darwin's theory of natural selection was the term overproduction. Overproduction is when species produce more offspring than can actually be supported by the environment. We see this a lot in reptiles, amphibians, fish. Think of frogs. Frogs or toads, they lay thousands and thousands of eggs with the hope that maybe one or two might make it to maturity. One or two might actually live to become an adult and reproduce themselves. This puffball fungus, it releases a cloud of spores, and all these little spores in here, when they land somewhere, they could grow a whole new puffball fungus. They don't, because not all are going to make it to the proper environment. They're not all going to have the perfect conditions. Some are just going to end up in the wrong spot. They're going to get carried away. They're going to land in the water. So the idea of overproduction is that many organisms produce way too many than the environment can actually support, but they hope that at least one is going to make it. The concept of reproduction is when these beneficial traits are passed on to offspring. So if an organism makes it, it has a good trait, it is the one that survives, it's going to pass those good traits on to any offspring that they have, so that the offspring are all going to have those beneficial traits to help it survive in its environment. The last component of Darwin's theory of natural selection is the idea of survival of the fittest. Now, survival of the fittest does not mean the fastest, smartest, biggest organism in the environment. It means that these are the only individuals with the best adaptations for their environment, and those are the ones that are going to survive. So survival of the fittest means they have the best camouflage, they have the best beak, they have the strongest wings to fly and get their prey, or they have really good eyesight. They are the individuals that have the perfect adaptations for where they live, and those adaptations will get passed on to their offspring, and the offspring will be able to survive in that environment as well. So now that you know a little more about Darwin and his theory of natural selection, you can be ready to put that knowledge to use in class tomorrow.